Welcome back to Newsline 13, everybody. Today's news is about mental illness in Ukraine. Ukraine is home to 46 million people. Did you know that Ukraine has one of the highest mental illness rates in the world? One of the latest studies show that 20.5% of Ukrainian people have some type of mental illness. That includes phobias, PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety attacks, depression, and disorder. According to Ronald Kessler, a Harvard Medical School researcher, said the most common ailments everywhere except Ukraine were anxiety disorders, which include panic attacks, phobias, and post-traumatic stress disorders. In Ukraine, where unemployment is rampant and as the country struggles with westernization, mood disorders, including depression, top the list. We have a guest speaker today, Dr. Coles, who is speaking to us from Ukraine, is here to provide more information about the problem that is uprising in Ukraine.
Thank you, Maddie. Health is a mirror of society. When a country is unable to provide adequate mental health care services for those citizens who are in mental distress, it means there is something fundamentally wrong. In Soviet times in Ukraine, people with mental illnesses were discarded, locked up in large institutions, usually outside urban areas, separated and hidden from the rest. They were unproductive elements, only costing money and not providing anything to the building of a radiant communist future. When Ukraine became independent, the Ministry of Health did not even know how many social care homes existed in the country, as all the data was kept in Moscow. Eventually, it transpired that Ukraine had at least 100 of these social care homes with an average population of 300 persons. Simple mathematics show how big the problem actually was and still is, because most, if not all, of these institutions are still there. 4 nurses cared for some 300 patients, plus 1 doctor who visited the institution 1 day per week. Half of the patients were bedridden, so one can imagine what an impossible task these nurses had. The stench of human misery was indescribable, and I felt terribly sorry for both the patient and the staff. Both were victimized by a fundamentally inhumane system. Another thing I should mention is mental illness as a result of Chernobyl. Chernobyl caused a lot of damage to the area surrounding where it happened, but from a public health perspective, the biggest impact of the Chernobyl disaster throughout the years has been on mental health, especially major depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, stress-related symptoms, and medically unexplained physical symptoms. After studying this region for about 25 years, I concluded that the psychological consequences, especially for mothers, continue to be a concern, and that the mental health care in affected regions is not adequate to meet their needs. A new report authorized by USC researchers has estimated that about 10 million people may still be suffering from mental and physical health problems related to this 1986 accident. Back to you, Maddie.
Guest speaker here today, also from Ukraine, Dr. Polchinsky, who is here to speak about his experiences interviewing patients in 2 different mental facilities who have committed some type of crime.
Let me read a little bit from my book. Around the world, people who are mentally ill are sent to a psychiatric hospital after committing crime. However, Ukraine does not have the resources to provide a psychiatric hospital with the proper equipment or staff. Instead, they are sent to institutions to be punished. They are given medications, usually high dosages, and several at a time. They are locked up 23 hours a day. They have nothing to do except smoke and read books. Reading books is near impossible though, because the medications they take make it so difficult to see. They are poorly fed as a result of bad financing of the system, and they have very little communication with the outside world, as visits are rare and telephone communication is severely restricted to once a week at the max. They do not know their rights, and nobody cares to tell them. Although the US is the only country that has a higher mental illness rate in the world, they have the resources to provide people what they need, unlike Ukraine. The US has roughly 40 psychiatrists per 100,000 people, which is one of the highest in the world. Ukraine has approximately 7 per 100,000. In the US, mental illnesses are being treated. In Ukraine, everything is stagnant as mental health worsens. Another big problem in Ukraine is the war. How did war in eastern Russia begin? It all started when the Ukrainian president walked away from a free trade deal with the European Union and instead sought closer economic ties with Russia. This sparked protests, which caused the Ukrainian president to withdraw, and then caused pro-Russian gunmen to seize areas in the Crimea region. Who was the war between? Pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian forces. How does the war affect people's mental health? There is a growing concern in Ukraine about the neuropsychiatric effects on the war on the eastern border on combat personnel. Among the consequences of war, the impact on the mental health of the civilian population is one of the most significant. Studies of the general population show a definite increase in the incidence and prevalence of mental disorders. Women are more affected than men. Other vulnerable groups are children, the elderly, and the disabled. Hundreds of thousands of children are paying a heavy price in the 3-year conflict. The children live in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. The trauma has taken a huge emotional and psychological toll on them. Children are very anxious. They wet their beds. They have nightmares. In some cases, they act quite aggressively and often withdraw from their families and friends.
Mental illness is an uprising problem that we must not forget about. If you want more information, stay tuned. We'll be back after the break.